Let's go to Israel, Jerusalem. Dan Diker is the president of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. He put together and did an investigation and analysis of what the so-called Students for Justice in Palestine actually is. Dan Diker, I want to welcome you to the show. How are you, sir?
Good to be with you, Mark. Shalom from Jerusalem in a continuation of a unimaginable tragedy here. Just to make one point, the Taylor Force Act that has not been enforced, today the Palestinian Authority is issuing millions of shekels to the over 1,500 Hamas terrorists that invaded Israel and beheaded babies, murdered children using machetes, entire families. Those Hamas terrorists are being now given lifetime annuities by the Palestinian Authority in contravention to U.S. law and in contravention to Israeli law. And I just mentioned that those laws in America have not been enforced properly, even though they've been passed by Congress.
Completely ignored by the American media, because the American media, on the one hand, is ignorant, on the other hand, pretends they're rooting for Israel, but for the most part are not. The Students for Justice in Palestine, Dan Diker, you've done a very thorough examination, and you have provided all your sources for this. They're linked to these terrorist groups, aren't they?
Yes, they are, Mark. And in fact, this has been overlooked by the main media discourse in the United States since we issued two versions of what's called SJP Unmasked by the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, fully footnoted. And in fact, the Hamas, which is little known in the United States, is a constituent member of the Boycott National Committee, which is the BDS committee that was established in 2005, 2006 in Ramallah, in the areas, one of the areas under the Palestinian Authority jurisdiction. The Hamas is in the United States. The Hamas is the poster child in hundreds of campuses around the United States, including Harvard, including NYU, some of the big universities across the United States. The Hamas is the poster child for what they call justice, peace, and equality of the BDS movement. So they're not only murdering babies in Israel, but they have a massive amount of support across university campuses.
And they have a massive amount of support, unfortunately, in the American media, especially on MSNBC and the New York Times and elsewhere, who have not done an expose. You did all the work for them. I noticed they ignore what you did. As I say, it's all footnoted. It's indisputable. And you say they're a byproduct of the American Muslims for Palestine. Tell us about that.
That's correct. In fact, the American Muslims for Palestine was founded by Professor Hatem Bazian, who actually called for a violent overthrow of the United States, which we know in the Middle East, in Arabic as intifada. He called for an intifada in the United States. He was the chairman, the founder of American Muslims for Palestine, which were the refugees, the non-indicted co-conspirators in the largest terror financing case in the history of the United States, $12 million that were funneled into Hamas's coffers from the United States. There were some indicted conspirators that was called the Holy Land case, and a couple of other Islamic organizations were shut down by the United States Treasury. Jonathan Schanzer of FDD did some phenomenal work and actually testified in Congress. The Foundations for the Defense of Democracies is FDD, and brought that out into the public discourse. However, Professor Bazian founded not only AMP, which were the refugees of the Hamas-affiliated organizations that I mentioned, but he then founded Students for Justice in Palestine in 1992, and then the National Students for Justice in Palestine in 2010, and they are on hundreds of U.S. campuses. As a matter of fact, Mark, if you look online right now, in the last 10, 12 hours, there are calls supporting the mass extermination of Israeli children, babies, elderlies, by machetes and by mass executions by those very organizations. You can look it up right now on Google, and you can find this massive support for the Hamas mass murder of Jewish children and women and civilians that reach is over 1,000 people, which, by the way, Mark, is 10 9/11s. If you compare the population of Israel to the population of the United States at 350 million, Israel 9 million, we suffered 10 9/11s in 24 hours.
It's unbelievable, and the people who listen to this program are well aware of this. And so my next question is this. These organizations on these campuses, they're only able to be on these campuses because the presidents, the deans, the faculty want them on these campuses. They're not required to have a group linked to terrorist organizations on their campuses. And then they're on 115 campuses. The University of Virginia just put out an outrageous statement, the students did. So these presidents and others at these universities could actually shut this down, couldn't they?
They could easily shut it down. And in fact, Hamas, which is a foreign terrorist organization, as so designated by the U.S. State Department, is not yet a so-called designated terrorist organization by the United Nations, as absolutely extraordinary as that is. But the deans and the presidents of these universities have under the banner of free speech, the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, have decided to allow these what they call grassroots student organizations to operate freely, even though they support the violent public declarations of Hamas leadership, of Palestinian Islamic Jihad leadership, of Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine, a Marxist-Leninist organization calling for the decimation of the Jewish state, and they've been doing it for years and years and years with impunity on these campuses.
You know, in this country, the communist Chinese have infiltrated our colleges and universities with these Confucius Institutes. Now we have the phony group here, the Students for Justice in Palestine, which is a front organization. So people are misled by a media in the United States that doesn't go behind these organizations, who founded these organizations, what the links are to these organizations. These are like Nazi-like college campus organizations throughout the country. They're having a big, event where they're pulling all their members together, and then you have these suckers on these college campuses who think this is some kind of a righteous group. But the giveaway is, when you are celebrating the extermination of Jews, which is what they celebrate, when you are celebrating the decapitation of babies, when you are celebrating the rape and all the atrocities that have been taking place the last 4 or 5 days in the Jewish state of Israel, something is horribly wrong with that. And you would think the media in America would take an interest in finding out what this group is. Now, they will now that I've had you on the show, because that's the way they work. We blaze the path, and then they pick it up. And when I say they pick it up, a lot of them won't. But some of them will and should, and that's thanks to your research. What else should we know about this organization? I don't know that. You tell me they're not on our terrorist watch list?
They're not on the terrorist watch list, and they haven't. And there's only been a couple of universities within the hundreds of universities that the students for the so-called Students for Justice in Palestine operate freely. They operate the annual Apartheid Week. That could be called the annual Israel Nazi Week. It's the exact same idea in politically correct nomenclature, because apartheid has become, unfortunately, in the American discourse, as American as apple pie when referring to the one small Jewish and democratic state. And this is what we have felt at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs in doing all this research has been overlooked, and university presidents ill-advised to allow this type of behavior. The Nazi and Soviet conspiracy theories run wild across these campuses and are, in fact, my own alma mater, Harvard University, has even allowed the student organizations to fund the annual Israel Apartheid Week under the banner of free and peaceful assembly, while essentially calling for the decimation of the Jewish and democratic state, which you and I and the rest of America and the rest of the world has just seen that Hamas is an ISIS lookalike and has acted with the same brutality as ISIS and other medieval mass murder organizations. It's really the Night of the Living Dead has come to Israel, and the Night of the Living Dead continues to operate with glee and with great fervor across hundreds of U.S. campuses today, supporting the Hamas's call for murdering Jews and destroying Israel. It's absolutely.
And by the way, just to interrupt now because I have a hard break. Your report is on my social sites. It'll be on my website, America, all my social sites. And I want to thank you for all the work that you folks did and put into this. And I hope some media out there will hear about it, but there's tens of millions of you out there. You can spread the word too. Dan Diker, thank you, my friend. We appreciate it. Be safe.
Thank you ever so much. jcpa.org. All the information is there for your viewers. It's free to download, and we'll be delighted to have your support and your interest in JCPA, Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. And thank you, Mark Levin,
we'll put a link on that, Mr. Producer, on all of our social platforms, if you don't mind.